All right, so tonight we're going to be diving into the story of Delonte West. You might know him from his time in the NBA, playing for teams like the Celtics and the Cavaliers. And he made millions during his career. But his story, it kind of takes some pretty unexpected turns off the court. We've got two sources here that really break down West's struggles with mental health and addiction after his NBA career.
Yeah, it's one of those stories that makes you really think. On the one hand, it's this incredible success story. You know, a kid who makes it to the NBA. But then you see how things unfolded later. It raises so many questions about the pressures these athletes face, especially the ones who come from tough backgrounds.
Okay, so let's unpack this. You mentioned his basketball career. Pretty impressive.
Oh, absolutely. You could see his talent right from the start, leading his high school team to their first ever state tournament. I mean, not just anyone can do that. And then at St. Joseph's University, he was part of one of the best backcourts in the entire country. He earned this reputation as just this fierce competitor.
So he was drafted by the Boston Celtics in 2004, right?
Yep. 24th overall pick, went on to play for the Sonics, the Cavaliers, the Mavericks, and he wasn't just bouncing around teams. These were some serious franchises. And over his career, he earned over $16 million. You would think that kind of success would set you up for life.
Right, but that's where things take a turn. The sources go into his childhood. And it was rough. He talked about being bullied for his appearance, for being biracial, and he used this phrase, happy poor, to describe his upbringing. What do you make of that phrase?
It's such a powerful way to put it, isn't it? I think it acknowledges that there was love in his life, but also a lot of instability. And, I think it kind of speaks to how much we can miss when we only focus on outward success. There's often so much going on beneath the surface.
For sure. He also talked about how basketball was his way to escape the difficulties he faced. But then an injury in 8th grade sidelined him, and that's when things kind of took a darker turn.
Right. He started self-harming and even had problems with prescription pills. It just reminds you that mental health struggles can start so early. And then there's this story, it's really poignant, about him almost attempting suicide in 8th grade.
Yeah, that one really got to me too. He was at his absolute lowest, but then he turned to prayer. He made a deal with God, promising to be eternally grateful if he could just make it to the NBA.
Yeah, it's almost like basketball became this double-edged sword for him. It was his escape, his path to a better life, but also this immense source of pressure. And I think that dynamic played out in his later struggles too.
Okay, so let's fast forward to 2008, when he had that breakdown during a preseason game with the Cavaliers. It was this big argument with a referee, and he ended up taking a break from basketball to get help. And that's when he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Yeah, that diagnosis is such a key moment in his story. But it's interesting to think how it could have been both a relief and a burden for him. On the one hand, it finally gave him an explanation for those extreme highs and lows he was experiencing. But then there's the risk of feeling labeled, having your identity reduced to just a diagnosis.
Right, and it's not like everything magically gets better just because you get a diagnosis. It's just the first step on a much longer journey.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me how the sources connect his bipolar disorder to the pressure of professional sports.
Oh, yeah, totally. They talk about how the constant scrutiny, the intense competition, the pressure to perform at such a high level, all of that can exacerbate the symptoms of bipolar disorder. It's a condition that already involves intense mood swings, and then you add this incredibly high-stakes environment on top of it.
Yeah, it's like trying to walk a tightrope during an earthquake. It's no wonder things continue to unravel for him even after the diagnosis.
Yeah.
He was arrested in 2009 for carrying loaded guns. And then during the NBA lockout in 2011, he was working at a furniture store just to make ends meet.
Yeah, that image is crazy. A former NBA player working at a furniture store. It's such a jarring reminder of how quickly things can change and how mental health struggles can affect anyone. It doesn't matter how much you've achieved or how much money you have. It really challenges this idea that success is a shield against these kinds of challenges.
Definitely.
It really makes you think about the support systems in place, doesn't it? Here's a guy who earned millions, played at the highest level, but when he needed help, where is that safety net?
And it wasn't like this was just some private thing, right? This
Yeah.
became very public, like in 2016 and again in 2020, when photos of him panhandling were all over the internet. It was so tough to look at those photos and not feel this sense of like, I don't know, almost like a collective failure.
Right, like we all let him down somehow. And I think that's where these sources get really interesting. They want us to think beyond just Delonte West and consider the bigger picture here.
Yeah, because even with support, this stuff's really hard. It's not a straight line to recovery.
Exactly. And one of the sources actually brings up Royce White, another NBA player. who's been really outspoken about mental health. And he criticized the lack of real, honest conversations about this stuff, both in the league and just in society as a whole.
What do you mean?
Well, he said we tend to only pay attention when someone's at a crisis point, instead of, just being open and supportive from the beginning.
Which kind of brings us to Mark Cuban's intervention in 2020. He literally went and picked West up off the streets, got him into rehab, even helped him find a job. It felt like such a turning point.
It did, and it shows how compassionate Cuban is, to step up like that. But it also highlights the limitations of these big interventions, because like we saw, West relapsed in 2022. Even with Cuban's support, he was spotted panhandling again. And then later, he was arrested.
It's like, you can't force someone to get help no matter how much you care
No, you can't.
or how much support you offer.
Nope. And that's why creating a culture that encourages people to ask for help, like before things get really bad, that's so important. It's about making it okay to be vulnerable. It's about making it normal to reach out for support.
So with Delonte West, it seems like there were a lot of missed opportunities, Like, what if he'd had more support back in 8th grade when he was first struggling? What if people understood the pressure he was facing? What if he'd felt comfortable, speaking up sooner? Maybe things would have been different.
Yeah, maybe. But we have to remember that there isn't just one thing that determines someone's path. West has actually said that getting his diagnosis helped him. It helped him understand those self-destructive behaviors. It gave him a way to understand his struggles.
That's a huge step, though, right? To be self-aware like that, to be able to connect the dots between your experiences and your actions.
It is. It lets you go from feeling like a victim to feeling like you have some control. You can start to identify those triggers, the patterns, the things you need to work on.
It's like you said, it's about moving beyond just Delonte West as an individual.
Exactly.
It's a much bigger picture.
It is.
Okay, so even though he's still struggling, his story isn't over. He was found unresponsive from an overdose this year.
Oh, that's right. I almost forgot how recent that was.
But he survived.
Yeah.
Which just shows how resilient he is.
It really does. And it shows how important it is to never give up hope, both for the person going through it and for the people who care about them, because recovery is rarely straightforward. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be times when it feels hopeless, but you can always get back on track.
That makes me think about all the people out there struggling silently, who don't get the same attention or support that Delonte West got.
It does, and it just highlights the need for greater awareness, more compassion, and just more resources for anyone facing mental health challenges.
It's about understanding that mental health is just as important as physical health, and it deserves the same attention and care.
Absolutely. We need to get to a point where asking for help with your mental health is just as normal and accepted as going to the doctor for a broken leg.
And it's not just about treatment, right? It's about prevention, early intervention, creating a culture that supports well-being from the start.
Exactly, like those systemic issues Royce White was talking about. We need to look at everything, from how we talk about mental health, to the resources available in our communities, to the policies that make it harder or easier to get care.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play here, in creating a society that actually supports the people who need it most.
And when it comes to pro athletes like Delonte West, it's about understanding the pressure they're under and creating a system that puts their well-being first, not just how they perform on the court. I think there are some really valuable insights in Delonte West's story. Like, it really highlights the importance of early intervention. What if he'd gotten the right support back in 8th grade, when he was first starting to struggle?
That's true. It makes you think about how much we could prevent if we were better at noticing and dealing with these issues early on.
Absolutely. And it's not just about noticing the problem. It's about giving young people a safe space to talk, to feel like they can ask for help.
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to just changing how we think about mental health, right? Like, it's not something to be ashamed of. And asking for help isn't weak.
Exactly. We need to make it okay to be vulnerable. We need to encourage people to get support. And we need to treat mental health just as seriously as physical health.
And Delonte West's story shows how important ongoing support is, too. It's not enough to just help when there's a crisis. We need to be there for the long haul.
That's so true. Recovery is a journey. It's not like you just arrive somewhere and you're done. There are going to be setbacks. There are going to be times you doubt yourself and feel lost. But having a support system makes such a difference.
It's like having a safety net while you're learning to walk a tightrope. You might wobble. You might even fall. But knowing that net's there gives you the courage to keep treating.
I love that analogy. And support can look like a lot of things. It can be family, friends, therapy, medications, support groups. There's no right answer. It's about what works for each person.
And making sure those things are actually available. We also have to hold institutions accountable, like the NBA. How responsible are they for their players' mental health? Not just while they're playing, but after their careers are over.
That's a tough one. And I think every professional sport is trying to figure that out. There's been a lot more awareness about mental health in athletes, but there's still a lot of work to do.
So, as we wrap up our look at Delonte West's life, I keep coming back to this idea of shared responsibility. Obviously, individuals need to take care of their mental health, but we have to make it easier for them to do that.
I agree completely. We need to break down the stigma. We need to talk openly about these things, and we need to fight for better resources and support. Mental health affects everyone.
Delonte West's story shows us what happens when we ignore mental health. It's a wake-up call for all of us to be kinder, to be more understanding, and to create a world where everyone has the chance to thrive,
Yeah.
no matter their struggles.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And to anyone listening who might be struggling right now, you're not alone. There's help out there. There are people who care about you, and there's always hope for a better future. Don't be afraid to reach out. Your life matters. You deserve support.